Secondly, there are various human rights problems among the Palestinians themselves. In this third review of the state parties report, we are supposed to focus on the second point, which relates to the obligation of the state of Palestine to fulfill, respect, and protect the rights recognized by the Convention of Persons Living under its jurisdiction, even though many of the problems facing Palestinians in this regard are due to the first aspect. I would like to commend the State of Palestine for submitting a detailed report, and I also appreciate the submissions of the Palestinian National Human Rights Institution, Independent Commission of Human Rights, and NGOs. Based on these reports, I would like to pose the following questions. First, as one NGO pointed out, we want to ask the Palestine Authority to submit a common core document for more comprehensive understanding of Palestinian history and current situation. Statistics. I would like to ask the government of State of Palestine to provide up-to-date data on the demographic composition of the population in the whole of the state party's territory, disaggregated by race, ethnic, or national origin. Also, I would like to ask the state party to provide detailed data and information on the enjoyment of the rights under the Convention by racial, ethno-religious, and national minority groups without discrimination. We also want to have disaggregated data on the number of non-citizens, including stateless persons, migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. In paragraph 23 of your report, you mentioned that there are no accurate or comprehensive statistics on the groups protected under the Convention at the national level. Are there any practical measures which can be taken to create such data? Would the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics be able to do it? Definition of racial discrimination. There is a lack of comprehensive definition of racial discrimination in accordance with Article 1 of the Convention, the Declaration of Independence of 1988, and the amended Basic Law of 2003 do not fully comply with the Convention. Please let us know of your effort to revise the Jordanian Penal Code of 1960 and the Penal Code of 1936, as well as the proposed draft Penal Code of 2011 to prohibit and punish discrimination in accordance with the Convention. Legal status of the Convention. Are the provisions of the Convention fully incorporated into national legislation, including through publication in the official gazette? According to the state party's report, the Supreme Constitutional Court's decision number 4 on November 2017 holds that treaties acceded to by the state party take precedence over national law only insofar as they are consistent with the national, religious, and cultural identity of the Palestinian people. What does the expression only insofar as they are consistent with the national, religious, and cultural identity of the Palestinian people in that decision means? Is it compliant with the state party's obligations under the Convention? The Independent Commission for Human Rights pointed out in its report that the provisions of both domestic legislation and the Convention cannot be enforced in Gaza Strip and some West Bank areas, including East Jerusalem, and that the State of Palestine's report does not outline any measures or intentions to ensure that the provisions of the Convention will be implemented in all parts of the State of Palestine. Please explain the state party's stance regarding this matter. The National Human Rights Institute report also points out that the Presidential Decree number 8 of 1998 and the number of laws listed in the State Party report are not used for implementation of Article 2 of the Convention in reality. Please clarify the situation for the committee. Harmonization and implementation of legislation. The current legal framework in Palestine consists of a mixture of Jordanian, Egyptian, Palestinian, Ottoman, and British laws, as well as Israeli military orders. Furthermore, different laws apply to West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Please provide information on the harmonization of the different sets of laws implemented in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank to ensure that all persons living under the jurisdiction of the State Party are afforded equal protection under the law in line with the Convention. What steps are being taken to amend discriminatory laws, including the Civil Service Code, the Egyptian Family Right Law, and the Jordanian Personal Status Code, and the Decree Law on General Elections to ensure their compliance with the Convention? Please provide detailed information on the implementation of legislative provisions that prohibit, in accordance with Article 4 of the Convention, the dissemination of ideas based on racial superiority or hatred, incitement to racial discrimination or acts of violence, and organizations that promote and incite racial discrimination. Access to justice and fair trial for all ethnic, racial, and national minority groups. Could you provide detailed information and data disaggregated by race and ethnic or national origin of the alleged victims on complaints of racial discrimination, hate crimes, and hate speech handled by national courts, the Independent Commission for Human Rights, the Complaint Department at the Ministry of Endowment and Religious Affairs or other relevant Palestinian institutions, a number of investigations, prosecutions, and convictions of perpetrators? What measures have been taken to raise the awareness of the public of their rights under the Convention and the available complaint mechanism? Did the State Party take any steps to revitalize the National Legal Aid Commission, finalize the strategic plan on legal aid, and adopt a draft law to establish the Legal Aid Fund for victims of racial discrimination? Then I move to National Human Rights Institution. What resources and specific mechanisms do you provide the Independent Commission for Human Rights in order for Commission to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the Convention in an independent and transparent manner? Are there any measures envisaged to formalize the status of the Commission through the adoption of an enabling law? Are there any steps taken to provide for remunerated full-time members amongst the decision-making body? The situation of NGOs and other civil society organizations. You mentioned that the State Party report was prepared in cooperation with civil society organizations and racial and ethnic groups, and you mentioned on the NGO Affairs Commission and the Palestinian Center for Research and Cultural Dialogue. However, as mentioned before, we only received 5 NGO reports. Among them, only 1 NGO is based in the Palestine, and the other 4 are outside Palestine. Could you explain the situation of NGOs within the state of Palestine? You mentioned there is no civil society group combating racial discrimination, which is such an important issue in Palestine, not formed. Why? Please explain about that. Situation of racial, ethno-religious, and national minority groups. At paragraph 24, You mentioned all racial, ethno-religious, and national groups are part of the Palestinian whole, which are not considered minorities. Could you give more information on the situation of racial, ethno-religious, and national groups as they are mentioned in paragraph 25 and 26a? Samaritan, Armenian, Afro-descendant, Syriac, Copts, Maghrebi, Roma, and Bedouin communities. And in paragraph 162b, Baha'is, Turkmen, Ahmadi, Druze, Bosnian, Circassian, Maronites, and Kurds. Of the State Party report, why didn't you provide even short explanation on the groups mentioned at the paragraph 162a? How are Kyrgyz, Jibalis, and dark-skinned people other than Afro descent? Please elaborate on their ability to fully enjoy all the rights covered by the Convention without discrimination. Please provide data on representation of racial, ethno-religious, and national minorities in political and public life, including their representation in state institutions and administration at all levels. Several international human rights NGOs have reported that there are arbitrary arrest and detention, torture, lack of accountability, especially in the conflict between Palestine Authority and Hamas. Is there any racial, ethnic, and national implication? Do you have data on the victims disaggregated by race and ethnic or national origin? There are reports that some ethnic groups, such as the Druze and the Kyrgyz, have had conflict with other Palestinians because of their cooperation with the Israeli army. Could you expand on that? Then, refugees and displaced persons. According to UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, out of 13 million Palestinians living in Palestine and in the diaspora, 6 million Palestinians are registered as refugees, 17% living in the West Bank and 25% in the Gaza Strip as of 2018. And your report said at paragraph 26b, 263,500 people have been forcibly displaced within the Palestinian territory since 1967. Their numbers are ever increasing due to the various difficult situations, including blockades and continuous demolition of homes. What measures has the state of Palestine taken to improve these conditions? What measures is the state party taking to unify and clarify the complex set of laws governing nationality to reduce the risk of statelessness? Please explain your effort to address the issue of nationality for Palestinians who are deprived of citizenship owing to prolonged refugee status abroad and to discriminatory citizenship laws in occupied Palestinian territories, in particular in East Jerusalem. The situation of non-citizens. Could you provide information on measures taken to ensure non-citizens' enjoyment of their rights under the Convention without discrimination? What are the measures taken to extend the application of the labor code to migrant domestic workers and to the informal sector to protect them from abusive practices and to ensure the enjoyment of all their rights under the Convention, including freedom of movement? Final page. 3 more minutes. Will you establish the measures to get the clear statistics on the number of foreign workers? Trafficking. Please inform us on the extent of human trafficking in the state party, as well as about the process of modernizing legislation to combat human trafficking and exploitative practices associated with trafficking, including forced labor, sexual exploitation, and domestic servitude. Elaborate further on complaint, investigations, prosecutions, convictions, sanctions, and redress and rehabilitation measures for victims of trafficking. And multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. Certain harmful traditional practices, including honor killings and child marriage, are still pervasive in the state party, and the Jordanian penal code subjects women and girls to even more difficult situation than men, in addition to the hardship related to the Israeli occupation. There are reports saying that discriminatory practices against women in marriage, divorce, inheritance, custody of children, travel, etc., and domestic violence is still prevalent in the state of Palestine. Please indicate what are the measures envisaged to improve this situation. Children and persons with disabilities in armed conflict are particularly vulnerable to human rights violation. Please describe the measures taken to address this discrimination. And awareness raising and education. Several NGO reports pointed out anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli prejudices and incitement to hatred and violence against Israeli and Jewish communities in Palestine, especially in the media, speeches of state officials, and school curricula, textbook. Could the state party provide any explanations in this regard? What are the strategies used by the state party to raise awareness on the negative effect of racial discrimination and the need for tolerance and understanding among different groups in order to combat racial stereotypes and prejudices? Please include effort made in school curricula and vocational training programs. Finally, please provide information on the impacts of the implementation of National Strategic Plan for Culture 2014 to 2016. I wonder if you have National Action Plan for improving human rights situation. These are my questions. One of my colleagues will support me before the general interactive dialogue on the issue of education. Distinguished delegation of the State of Palestine, I thank you again for your sincere report, which was the first report submitted to the third. And I also appreciate the delegation for your excellent presentation. I expect you to answer all my questions as well as other comments and questions from my colleagues. Thank you very much for your listening to my presentation. Thank you.